What's Your Work Fit is sponsored by Hudson Davis. Start your brand's marketing and communications journey today at hudsondaviscommunications.com. I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. So great to have you here today. What we do at What's Your Work Fit would not be possible without you, our audience, our engaged audience. I want to thank you for the support that you give us over the past year and a half or so. You've helped to scale this show in terms of audience participation and made it a better show, made it more relevant to people who are in the workplace, trying to figure it all out, trying to overcome those fever dreams they have at 2 a.m. about the work that they do and hope to do. So again, thank you. Thank you so much. If you are new to the show and you are not already connected up with us, I want to point you to where we stream our live show. Most of you find us on LinkedIn. If you're not currently a member of What's Your Work Fit on our page, hit that follow button with the plus sign. If you're finding us on Facebook Live, do the same. And on our What's Your Work Fit YouTube channel, hit that black subscribe button and you'll never miss future live shows and any of the pre-recorded content that we already have. It's a growing library. One more thing, and this is my big ask, is I want you to tell 5 friends about What's Your Work Fit and get them to subscribe to us so that they too don't miss all the discussion that we're having, the content that we have libraried, and all the other value propositions that we're bringing to place. Again, without you, we couldn't do this. So thank you, audience. Thank you so much for all that you do. Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest this week. Her name is Marissa Huber. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us as our guest today. I'll tell you a little bit about Marissa. She is the Consulting Director of Workplace Strategy at Cushman Wakefield, and it's there where she helps leaders to figure out what to do with their people and spaces to make the workplace better. It's a good gig.
All the answers. We figured it all out. I'm just kidding.
Well, let's bring our co-hosts into the conversation. First off, I want to introduce you all to Mark Gilbreth, who is the founder and skipper of Liquid Space. How you doing, Mark?
Good. Good morning, Marissa.
Hi, Mark. Nice to see you.
And last but not least, Fran Saley, who many of you know from LinkedIn. He is prolific writing about future of work and workplace. How you doing, Fran?
I'm great, Dan. Thank you. And hi, Marissa. Good to be with you.
Nice to see you, Fran.
So let's get to the question that we 3 are dying to ask you about, and it is this. How does workplace impact the employee experience? How do you unpack that question, Marissa? And how do you get the square footage to align well with the employee experience?
Well, I feel like it feels like a tough question these days because it goes hand in hand. So I will say, just to frame it up in my point of view, I have like an interior design background, and I've worked for a majority of my career. I worked in-house. I worked at GlaxoSmithKline and at Univision Broadcast Television for in-house projects. So a lot of occupancy planning, project management, design, things like that. So one of the benefits was I really got to live with the clients, knowing people's numbers by heart, knowing every single part of the business, to understand how there's not one size fits all, even within an organization, on the impact of employee experience or what people and individuals need, right? Mm-hmm. So when we look at experience, I think we need to kind of be very high level and look for alignment, best practices, fairness, equity. But we also need to then go dive deep and look at individuals. Like, what do individuals need? What does an introverted person on your team from another culture need from this person who's very extroverted and 15 years younger? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say can we solve for everything, but just trying to find ways where people can be on the same page. But in terms of like, how does it impact? I think it's just, how do you want people to feel when they think of your company, whether they're at home, whether they're in they're telling a friend, whether they're like recommending somebody apply for where you go, or if they're just in the office. What does that feel like? And it's kind of a mix.
Fran?
Yeah, Marissa, this is a question that I think you're in a unique position to answer. Having been in the real estate service provider world for over 25 years, basically. I left in 2020, which was, of course, the moment of change in where workplace was. You could see that workplace was growing in importance in the few years before that. But before that, it was really just, well, we know that our clients are growing. We need to go from 10,000 feet to 12,000 feet. We have a group that does that. They lay out the space. That was about it. That was a very narrow role. Today, that's been turned upside down. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, what has happened within corporate service organizations with respect to the positioning of workplace versus transactions or other services, which historically were always in the lead? Brokers always were the primary relationship with clients, always. I don't know if that's changed or not. Can you give us a sense of how that evolution has evolved, or how that's happened within your firm or other firms like yours?
Well, and I'll say, like, just to frame it up again too. So I've worked at JLL, I worked at Johnson Controls back in the day. When I joined Cushman, I joined in April 2021. So kind of at this strange point. Mm-hmm. And I was hired by a wonderful broker who saw the value of workplace experience, workplace strategy to help their clients find, let's say, figure out what to do with transactions, right? In ways of, we know that it's important, and we as the brokers value that. And we want to make sure that the client relationships that they're building, that they're able to say, we don't want to just build a space and say, okay, here's the square footage. We want you to understand why it's working. We want to understand how it might change in the future. Like an investment in a lease or making a big change, it's a big commitment, right? It impacts your culture. It impacts, it's an investment. Mm-hmm. So they want to make sure that they do it right. And you might need to be flexible. Like, what if you need to expand or contract? How do they think about that as brokers to make sure that they're putting flexibility in to serve the client? So that's kind of how I came into corporate real estate, from working at corporate real estate, larger companies, in a more account level. Does that make sense? To just
yes, sure.
So what I see now that's changing is clients are more savvy. Like, who knew what workplace was maybe 5 years ago? It wasn't this jargon that everybody uses. Everybody's talking about, everybody has an opinion about hybrid now. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are things that everybody wants to talk to you about, what's going on, what's working. So one, everybody has an opinion. Two, sometimes people have really polarizing opinions. It's almost like political at this point, and there's no one size fits all, because I would say, if we look at, you can have a gorgeous space, you can have the most gorgeous designed office, but if your culture sucks, or you have like really toxic managers who, if you go and use a huddle room and they go to you and say, oh, you weren't at your desk, what is that teaching people? So I think that we have, we need change management. We need etiquette and guidelines. We need to prioritize the bonding and the social connections that don't seem like they're important, but really have a strong ROI so that we can talk and connect and have innovation. So I think it's just more holistic and people are more savvy. That's what I would leave with.
Okay.
Mark?
Good,
Sir?
thank you.
Marissa, you mentioned individual needs as one of the important things to solve for. In the before times, in fact, 4 years ago, in the before times before the pandemic reared its head, workplace was for most companies a one size fits all prescription.
Yeah.
It's not to say that the space designs weren't thoughtful and intending to create experience, but they were homogenous, and employees were expected to be there. And then with the flip of a switch, or with a company edict and mandatory shelter at home, workplace became incredibly personal and very individual on a global basis, and for a lot longer than any early predictors would have guessed. For many companies, it was a year or more, in some cases.
Yeah.
Multiple years. So how should your clients and employers in general bridge that experiential chasm between I've got total control over where I'm working, what I wear, what time I start, what time I finish, what I eat, where I sit. In the workplace is my home, or it's the co-working space in your home. That's a pretty huge chasm jump away from where we would 4 years ago, and where some companies seem to want to drag their employees back to. So how are you advising clients to think about and bridge that experience gap?
I think it's really about finding this sweet spot. If I had a magic wand and I could solve it, I mean, I wouldn't be talking with you. We'd all be millionaires living in like Bali or wherever. I don't know. But
Bali's nice.
Yeah. I thought you'd miss the snow, maybe, Dan, right? But what I think is a lot of people are on the same page, but when they don't see it. So like employers want their employees to be doing well and being productive and loyal and all these things, right? We can say. And I would say most employees want to enjoy the people that they work with, have a good manager, have flexibility, because modern life is difficult. Let's address that. So like those are two things that seem the same to me. It's just how we agree upon getting there might look different. So I think it's having clear expectations. I think communication is most important right now, to understand what are we saying, what do we mean, and also are we walking the walk? Because what are the expectations? What are the circumstances? What are the outcomes if you don't do X? Are you going to be penalized if you don't come in 3 days a week, right? If that's the goal. Are there any special circumstances? So let me take myself back a little bit to just say I think there needs to be clear guidelines that are like at this top level, but then I think we need to look at where's the nuance, right? So if somebody has a special need, or a child, or maybe they have been diagnosed with ADHD and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Right.
How do you have some flexibility, but you can communicate that to the team, not to say, hey, let me tell you all this person's personal stuff, but we'll work with you on a one-to-one basis. Okay, this person is leaving early on Thursdays, perhaps. How can other people on the team have something that's maybe equal or different? Does that mean other people have flexibility? I think you just have to figure that out.
Just a quick follow-up on that, if I may, Dan. Last week, Dan shared a video that made the circles of LinkedIn, and it was, perhaps you saw it, Marissa, it was well trafficked. Internet brands CEO in a rather ham-fisted staged video, a lot of green screens, essentially saying, Marissa, you got to come back because I said so. Now they wrapped it up in a little bit of marketing gobbledygook and PR gobbledygook, but that was the message. Mm-hmm. And I think most observers saw that. That seems like the lack of nuance. Yeah. That's a guideline / mandate. How are companies tackling that nuance? That seems like the really difficult part. And are they being authentic about that? Do you think there's really intent to apply nuance in interpretation?
No, but that is hard, because it's funny. I had a client where I think about parenting. Like, you have to say sometimes, this is what we're doing. Yep. Okay. And this is why. Okay. Like, connect it to the why. If I just said, I want you to come back. Okay. If it is about an investment or understanding that, maybe is there a way to share that? Okay. If we don't invest in the space that we have, or I'm just kind of making something up right now. Like, what does it mean to people? Okay, if we don't show our value and that we're a good stewards of our investment, then maybe that would impact jobs or something like that. Like if there is something that's real that you can share and bring people along for the journey. If you said, hey, I just need you back 3 days a week because the heating bill is high. I don't know. But if you said, listen, we've noticed that over time we're getting less sales. People are telling me that that they feel uncomfortable when they come in the office, and we're not gelling together. We're not sharing ideas. We did an organizational network analysis. If you tell me that and say, we need you being here for 15 years to share and help these people coming up, like that might mean something to me. If you go to my values and say, Marissa, you remember all the people that helped you when you were 27? We need you to do that and help those people now. Can you do that? And remind people in their 50s, like, hey, what are you doing? How can we reverse mentor? But we need you. And maybe prioritize that, but say, okay, well, we're looking at your bandwidth. We know we can't just ask you to do more stuff. So here's what we're doing. Everyone has a goal to spend 1 hour per month on X. And this is a company-wide initiative. And this is why it's important. And we're going to track this results. We want feedback. Like, do something that means something to people. But don't just tell them like they're children because you've trusted them for 2 years. They've done well. We've seen companies do well, and then act like, hey, your kid was sick. I don't care. Come back in,
And therein lies the rub in that, as Mark referred to it, the stewards of investment. We've spent billions of dollars building this palace. You need to be here, and so and some of these comments came in before the show. Ellie she describes herself as a de facto people officer in her company, and her higher ups want to entice return to office with more in-house amenities and stuff. I guess more backgammon boards and massage tables and stuff like that. Do you find, like Ellie, that we're still having these wrong conversations about how to create workplace EX? Are you still hearing things like that in your daily?
Probably a little bit, but also I think people are a little jaded. Like, if you want to get a finger on the pulse, I think go on like TikTok or Instagram and look at the workplace memes, look at the comments, knowing that maybe it's not all real. You could have bots, but I think that gives me a good sense of what people are saying at different levels. Okay. Workplace amenities. It's hard because I think that it does matter to have some of these things, but we need to build it into, say, company hours, right? If you say, I want you to come into work and also I want you to do something afterwards, that's hard for caregiving for elderly parents. How many people are doing that? And children, like there's so many different things. But I think you need to focus on things that people want that are also beneficial and have meaning. Like if you said, we're going to do social media training to help you meet your sales goals, and we're bringing somebody in-house, we would love to make this an in-person event. We're going to feed you. This is the day our leadership is coming. We would love for as many people to be here as possible. I think that's more impactful than like Taco Tuesday.
How does that impact your job? Before you had this role, I think to Fran's initial comment about it being transactional, there was a certain mathematical formula that applied to the number of people in the co-location, how much square footage they needed, how much common space was needed, how many conference rooms you needed, and that determined an outcome.
Yeah.
Not so easy anymore because you're not siloing people anymore. Smart leaseholders are creating engagement spaces.
Yeah.
So how do you, in your work, unpack that?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I feel like every answer is gonna be like, yes, and this. There's still a lot of clients, and I do think it's important to look at that, to say, all right, yes, we are still doing a lot of space programming and looking at it and really wanting to get that sweet spot. You don't want people to go into an office that's so big, but that nobody uses, that when you do come in, we jokingly call it like it's Armageddon, right? So then you're like, well, I am now negatively impacted when I come in. So what's the point? And that negatively reinforces you not wanting to come in and not seeing the purpose. Or when you do come in, a lot of people still need to do focused work. You know, we have distributed teams. So I need to have those quiet spaces, which one point I want to make about that. I've noticed, and I've talked to clients, like over the pandemic, a lot of people had more quiet space than usual, or you might have had screaming kids at home like me, and you found yourself like noise is driving me crazy where it didn't as much a few years ago. So I think people are more sensitive to, say, noise and distractions, just like the mental load of the pandemic. I think that's still sitting with us a little bit. So sorry, Dan, to answer your question, we still do need to just do like the very transactional stuff. Some people, they don't really care about experience. They're like, tell me how much space I need and we'll build it. And we're not as interested. What we try to do is, you know, really share and try to say, we want to make sure that you're also thinking about these things as well. So maybe, you know, having a central point to kind of funnel people in for those spontaneous interactions. That's something that Cushman Wakefield did at their Washington, D.C. new office build. They almost have like a central avenue. So you, not necessarily that you have to all be together, but you have points to interact through the design. That's important.
I would imagine I'm hearing a lot about neurodiversity impacting space and engagement now, and especially among knowledge workers, perhaps who are programming. There's high corollary between the types of people that are engaged in that kind of work and perhaps being somewhat on the autism spectrum. A lot of smart people, but they are hypersensitive to their surroundings, perhaps to light or noise or so forth. So I would imagine that impacts too in the conversation, depending upon the client.
Yeah. And I have some family members who are autistic or ADHD, and some like the ADHD, I have a lot of friends who are being diagnosed a lot later. Especially like women. There's also talk about health, like perimenopause, and how that might affect memory in women and things like that. So really good conversations that are happening that I think we wouldn't have had 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. But we do look at the space. I think the neurodiversity has come up a lot. So we think about where are spaces to get away? Do you need a sensory room? Do you need a wellness room? Do you have some etiquette? And just making sure we have accommodations to support everybody.
Fran?
So let me follow up with a little bit, Marissa, on the concept that workplace has really transformed into much more of the human experience than the space program and the design, right? So I mean that happens in the office space. It does, but your focus seems to be, based on the conversation, much more about the human experience, what works, what doesn't work, how that relates to individuals and groups versus someone doing an independent program of how many desks and how many conference rooms. So with that in mind, a couple of questions. One, how do you as a service provider and your team engage? I mean, it sounds like the engagement is much beyond just the space itself. It's the elements of it that make up where that work should be done and how it should be done. And with that in mind, how do you get involved with non-office space workplace? Because the workplace is clearly shifting in the distributed manner. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to everybody, and that does have some impact on the more traditional office. How do you bring that together, and how does your role work today with clients in this area, and how deep do you go?
So do you mean like remote employees or just satellite sites, things like that?
Well,
or
I mean,
manufacturing versus just corporate headquarters, things like that.
Yeah, well, strictly knowledge workers. So that's the only area I think we're talking about today. How do you become involved in identifying people who should be remote more often than others? And do you make that case to the client, or does the client work with other people internally to figure that out? How is that analysis done, which would ultimately get into this program of whatever space you're talking about in office? But since it's the non-office part of workplace that's growing, how is that evolving within your world?
Yeah, I'm thinking. So I will say, okay, so I want to answer the one question first on workplace strategy. So if I had to summarize that, and what is still holistic about it is that we are trying to align recommendations for the physical workplace and solutions that match up with how people work, business strategy, and the goals, right? And what's going to be best so that happy fit solutions for everybody.
But is that your happy fit, or is that the company saying we've decided we want?
I think that's the, like, if I just had to summarize what workplace strategy is in general, that's kind of how I would define that. Like, figuring out, I'm not designing the space, but I'm saying I think you need these types of spaces, this many, before we then move on to work with an architect and design. So I just want to like clarify that first.
Okay.
As part of that, what I think that is really important that we also need to think about is the experience and culture and the heart, the fuzzy things about it that impacts how we perform in the space as part of the overall workplace strategy. I just didn't want to like say that, because some people define workplace strategy as like one specific thing, and they'll probably be on here saying like Marissa's crazy. I just think that we really need to be holistic about the people as well.
So there are many more elements than there used to be, obviously. And
I think that it's more tightly integrated, in my opinion, you know, like diversity, equity, inclusion. You know, we've jumped over to neurodiversity, which is fantastic. But I think sometimes do we skip over diversity, equity, and inclusion because that seems harder to talk about, and it might be even more triggering. So I want to make sure we don't bypass that. Microaggressions, like all of this stuff is important. Fran, going back to what you said though, how do we look at that in terms of like the different experience of how we solve for that? Here's an example. So say we have a client and we're trying to figure out how much space do you need? Your hybrid policy has changed. Some people have moved 200 miles away, right? What we would do is we would work with the leadership to understand, okay, what is your head count? How much space do you need? Who needs a dedicated seat? What is your policy? You know, we still have a lot of clients saying, I don't care if they come back 3 days a week. I want them to have a dedicated seat when they come back, because 87% is focused work. Like, it's just going to range. Not everybody wants to.
Does that make sense to you? And what do you say to a client who says that? I mean, obviously they get what they want because they're the client, but
I think it depends on their goals, right? Okay. I mean, if your goal is that if your employees are going to quit because they don't have the specific space that they need to get their work done when they're in the office, then we need to at least say, hey, here's some due diligence. Here's options to explore with different scenarios, right? But here's the pros and cons. If you just took everybody out of seats, for example, then here's what could happen, right? Based on the, like at Cushman, shout out to Brian Berthold. We have an experience per square foot survey that we use. I've used that with 2 big projects recently where we did a focus on workplace strategy and also on culture, right? So we could see what all the employees across the board were saying, right? But then we also are talking to leaders. We're doing leadership interviews to understand what do they need. And then we're doing we did focus groups for a client, and we had 3 focus groups, and we met with people across the company to hear from them. And then we even did a leadership visioning session. So we try to mash that all up to then say, here's our recommendations, looking at all of that. And here's the pros and cons and where we might want to start based on what your goals are as a company.
Well, I'm sure it can be a delicate conversation, particularly at the beginning.
It can be, and it depends though. But like we just had a client that was so wonderful and open, and they really wanted to learn. And they're like, hey, we really want to help support people. And then some people might say, I don't really care. I'm checking off a box. Like, you're going to encounter a range.
Right.
But if we can show what the value is and try to make sure that we can impact people positively, I want to do that.
A quick corollary question, because I really want to ask this. What do you do about what I call the curmudgeon CEO, who is a guy who's probably been at that firm for 30 years?
It's always a guy.
No, that's not fair. It could be a woman, but yeah.
Say that's true. Who doesn't really understand the new experience. And is determined to kind of get his way. Obviously, again, he's the client. You're going to ultimately do what they say. But what steps do you take to try to broaden their view, or to get them to understand the benefits, maybe, particularly on the cost side, because the cost benefits of doing other things are significant. What is your strategy to approach the curmudgeon CEO.
I love it. So for a curmudgeon, my dad was a complete curmudgeon. So I'm like, I see you. But I think it's, well, here, at one of my jobs, they called me an office hostage negotiator, and I had to get 13
Oh my
presidents.
gosh.
Yes. I mean, the CFO called me that, and it stuck with me. But I had to get a lot of lovely curmudgeons and get their point of view and try to understand, what were they scared of? What was it? Like, I always try to put my lens on that. Is it that they don't care, or they probably care about something? My job as a consultant is to figure out, what do they care about? And how do we show how it impacts it? So if they're just saying like, it is just the bottom line, sure. Okay. But then what does that mean? If you only care about the financials, great. Now what happens if you lose all this production and, time to market because 25% of your team left and they went to the competitor because they really care about this. And if you make this decision, that's actually going to hit you where you don't want to. It's not just about the space. If I would say anything, I would say it's not just about the space. It's about the entire whole person who's showing up and their perception about whatever it is that you're doing in these decisions. I'm not saying we can please every single person. You can't. But how can we at least show why the right path to move forward to for your company is meeting the goals that you want?
Right.
Yeah. So I would just show them like, okay, like this is what you care about. But I've had some clients, the curmudgeons leaders, who said, when I found out, like if I talk to somebody's direct reports and they say really good things, like I love them, they would do anything for me. I'm like, oh, they're curmudgeon because they're protecting their people, And one of my favorite clients ever, they were so grumpy at first and they became one of my favorites because they just truly cared. And they had been burned. So it's just kind of like, you're also a workplace therapist,
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe because you listen to them so well. I mean, that's probably the lubricant and all of that, right?
Yeah. And I want to because I have this background. It's funny. Yeah. I know we were going to talk about like some side interests and stuff. People are like, what is this lady sitting in this random art studio? I did want to mention, like, I am a corporate consultant. I sit in an office and I love going to the office, but I wanted to show my home studio today because part of the discussion is showing up as a person and not just you're not just one thing. Like, I'm not just defined by my consulting job that I actually love. I never thought I would love working at a real estate company, but I love working at Cushman. I have great people and whatnot. I'll answer that later as my last question. Sure. But I also get to do all this fun stuff in my free time. And that's part of me as a whole that I bring to everything I do.
Let's get to Mark. I got a couple of viewer questions after that.
Cool. We haven't mentioned landlords yet. So let me throw a question at you on that front, because I think you do or have done some work with the space provider community in the past. 4 years ago, again, pre-pandemic, the average big landlord was probably boasting to some degree about the wonderfully amenitized buildings, and there had been a wave of capital investment, in the half decade leading up to the pandemic. A lot of new marble into lobbies, a lot of health clubs, yoga studios, various other amenities. Before that wave or if landlords could have a do-over now, right, and have that capital that they expended to apply in some different way, what would your prescription be as you think about the needs and wants of your occupier clients?
It's a great question, Mark.
Yeah, no. And we did. So it's funny, when I came on board, I did something on like amenities that matter. I did that in like December 2021, because I'm like, something that's important? I wrote a little white paper point of view on that for Cushman. And then we did an amenities survey or like report in like middle of last year. So we did a survey, not to say, hey, this is all going to make everybody come into the office, but we looked at like the top 100 top leases across the country to see what did those offices have, or excuse me, what did those buildings have? We were just really interested to see like what the options were. So having that background, what I would say is I still do think it's important, because when we look at what a lot of occupiers are doing, they do care about flight to quality. Like, they might be decreasing in space to save money, but they want to go to a better quality office. Like, people do want to come into better spaces still. They still do care about the snacks that they have. Even if they're like, I don't care about snacks, and they'll make a joke about Taco Tuesday. If those snacks aren't there, or they have to pay for coffee, which has become the status quo at this point, they're going to be disappointed. So I would say, I think it does matter, like, did the elevators work well? Are we waiting? Like the convenience things we found in some of that research was like, convenience is really important. So if people are coming to the office, depending on where you are, they want access to highways. They want access to good parking, public transportation. And those can also impact your diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. If you want to make sure you're hiring diverse candidates, those are really good things to be thinking about. You want to make sure that you're having access to like food, beverage. I think that's one of the most important. I would encourage landlords to be thinking about, like, do you have some type of food option? And if you don't have a cafe, do you have a service? Do you have a DoorDash place where people can drop something off? Because people care about that, and it's easy for people to just go downstairs, eat together. We would do that all the time at our Cushman, Miami office. And actually our broker would then make us a cafecito afterwards in the Miami office. It was like a nice way to bring people together, but not have to leave and take a lot of time. Fitness center though, like that's the one that I'm like, people want to check it off, but I would like to see the statistics if people are actually using them, because I think a lot of people during the pandemic probably switched to personal trainer, Peloton, if they have it. I need to up my fitness, but I go ride my bike. But I think that people might not be using that as much, and that's a hefty investment.
It is. One category that a minority of landlords, notable folks like Tishman Speyer and Hines, began to invest in the pre-times, and they were in the minority, was flexible office offerings, even in-house co-working brands.
Yeah.
Do you think that was well spent? Would that be a do-over, or should there be more of that across the landlord landscape, in your opinion?
I think I have to think about that one, because we do have a lot of because a lot of my clients are not using that at this point. I think it's a great for like swing space. And there's a lot of people that I've met with and like visited like different types of spaces and seen like that can be supportive. I would think that a lot of clients like having that tenant lounge, having a conference space that they can book out. So that I think is really impactful. For example, if you're saying, once a year, I need to fit 80 people in my space. Do I really want to use my real estate within my 30,000 square feet or whatever that is to do that? No, but downstairs, I can use this as part of my, the landlord. That's more impactful, Oh, and I can hire the catering and I get it this amount and it has a lounge. Like that stuff's important, I think, and it's a better efficient use of space, to Francis's point, or Fran's point, like, if you're not going to use it that often, like how do we have flexible spaces that can do multiple things when you need it? Like right now, if you go to a conference room, there might be one or two people in them because they didn't have a space. They didn't have a phone room. They didn't have a Zoom room. So what do we need now?
I can tell you from back in the day, my experience working in a ad agency, and I was involved in database marketing and so forth. I went to that conference room because I could spread out all the green bar printouts on that conference table, usually during off hours. That was a great amenity to me. I didn't have a big enough office to be able to do things like that. I would imagine that's still, those types of things still pop up where somebody wants to be able to go to an alternate space whereby they can spread out their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having that, or if you're doing agile or a scrum session, do you bring a team for a week and you have a space where you can like leave everything up confidently or securely? What do you need? And that's the thing. It's like, what do departments within a company need? And how do we put in guidelines and standards and then the nuance to make it work based on who's using it,
So a couple more questions, because we're actually nearing the end of this segment, which is unbelievable. It could go on forever.
I'm gonna miss you guys.
Yeah, likewise. I want to get to all right. Well, this is a comment that Adriana made this morning. The shift in physical spaces post-pandemic requires new perspectives. We've certainly talked about that. and she was referring more to like where the RTO is an edict, where it's like that internet brands thing where we're not asking, we're telling you to get back.
Yeah.
And she put up something on LinkedIn this morning about a case of a woman who has a chronically ill family member, a young child, and there was a certain social media shaming of this company because the boss said, "I don't care. I need you in the office."
I saw that.
Have we ever? Are we still dealing with that kind of stuff I mean, where you have to pull the leaseholder away from the ledge a little bit to say, you know, you're going to have people who have families, have critical emergencies. I mean, I had that early on. I was lucky enough to be working remotely when my kid got sick. If I had to work in DC or whatever, it would have been a problem.
No.
What are your thoughts on that?
No, at first, and that was a sad one to see, because like we all raise your hand. We all know somebody who's been in that situation. I've been. I actually had written that down with some of my notes, where my son. Here's an example. My son, when he's almost 11 now, but when he was 1, you know, my husband and I both worked. I was the primary caregiver in addition to working. But he had really bad RSV and had to be hospitalized like 5 times in a year, which thankfully he is fine, you know, and we live near CHOP in Philadelphia, best care ever. Yeah. But you're not allowed to use sick days with your child at a lot of companies. And this was maybe 10 years ago. But I also worked flexibly, and I had an amazing client manager who was like, family is first. He's like, as long as you get your stuff done, whatever you need to do, your son comes first. Thankfully for that. But I also had a laptop, and we had gone to open desking. So we were already in that situation with the flexibility. And this was 2013. You know, so just a reminder that this flexible working is not new. You know, people have been doing this for 20 years. But if I hadn't been able to do that, just the stress of it all, you know, like, am I going to lose my job if I'm going to do that? It's hard enough already. And then you're worried about like a child in the NICU, in the example that I'm pretty well aware of. Yeah. Like, we are humans first. And that's the thing. Like, I understand that at the high level, we need to look at people as, maybe you have to look at them as checks on a spreadsheet to make big decisions. Right. Because it's very hard to look at individuals and say, oh my gosh, well, I know this. I wouldn't want to be an executive at that level to have to make those hard choices. But how do we have things in place for when those things happen? Like, hey, okay. And shout out to the HR leaders, who I think so many of them have done so much during the pandemic to really try to make things work. But what are the contingency plans, right? Okay, what could this person do? What's the flexibility? What's the communication? So if we set things up in advance, so we know these things could happen and this is our response when those happen, versus you now have to have a public shaming and your stock goes down and you're impacted in that because of something that could have been proactively thought about, perhaps.
Fran, we're running out of time, but I want to give each of you a chance to ask one more question.
Well, maybe this is maybe a good wrapper question. Marissa, in terms of the workplace in the future, where do you see workplace changing over the next 5 years? What's going to get better? What's going to get more difficult? And what factors associated with AI or technology are going to change what we know today?
Okay, Fran, with the hard-hitting questions. Okay, wait. Okay, so how do I think things will change in the next 5 years, especially with all the impacts of everything that's going on? Technology,
AI, everything.
Yeah. No, and I'm trying to look at AI. Like, I tested out the metaverse last year. I've looked at ChatGPT and Copilot as examples. Okay,
that's great.
A cousin of mine works at UiPath. Like, I haven't used that product yet, but I think it's just going to continue to be flexible and evolving. Like, the only constant we're going to see is that it's going to keep shifting. And I think that we don't know. We don't know what to expect yet. I do think that every time we see people saying like, okay, all right, Labor Day, we're going to come in. Okay, this is going to happen. I think at some point we need to say it's shifted.
Yeah.
I don't know what the path is forward, but here's how we're finding those. A lot of the companies that I'm working with we've figured out our hybrid. We're okay with that. We just need some help moving forward with change management is a big thing that I think more people are going to need change management. They're going to need more help with events and hospitality type things to make a bigger impact when they are bringing people together. Like I could see more need for, in-house retreats, budgets towards bringing people together for specific training, skills building, transferable skills, like maybe what can you bring from outside because now we have gaps to fill, or training with how do we use AI better? How do we use it for my job specifically? What are those things? I'm trying to think what else we have. Let me see if I have my notes. I think we will have more focus on, if I made one prediction for 2024, I'm not making any like resolutions and stuff this year. I think we're going to see more healthy boundaries of people.
Yeah.
And I think that flexibility goes both ways. So if I had to say, if a company is saying, I want you back in the office 5 days a week, sure. However, if you're in the office 5 days a week, 8 to 5 or whatever that is, do we still have to answer email after work? Do we still have to work on a weekend occasionally? And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but you can't have your people on hand 24/7 and expect them to adhere to rules that are quote, from the past, if we're not bringing the expectations from the past, in my opinion.
But you're really not getting that question, are you?
Of which one?
What, back in the office 5 days a week?
Some people. Yeah.
Yes, I would imagine she would.
I mean, there's some people who they would be happy if every single person was sitting at their desk for, and they're like, oh, well, they did their laundry at home. Yes. But have you ever been to an office? And like, these are good things. Like if you go to an office, there's people sitting at somebody's desk for 20 minutes. What's the difference in if they did their laundry or not, and I've gone to places where they said, oh, now they're going to make us come back 5 days a week, say in like the legal industry, not all of them, but like one specific firm I spoke with. And she had no natural light. They were like sitting here and she's like, I love doing my job at home. And I knew she would be looking.
Right.
So there's no one size fits all, but just, you have to look at everything.
Right. Mark.
Thanks, Dan. Marissa, you shared earlier, maybe it was in our pre-chat, but that you live in Fort Lauderdale, South Florida, fantastic, extraordinary environment. Yesterday, I read an article the clickbaity headline was 10 cities that may not exist in 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
I think Miami was number 2 or number 3. Right? So with that as backdrop, sustainability and the sustainability topic still far too often, to me at least, feels like a marketing ploy when it's discussed by landlords and even occupiers. With the footprint of the built landscape and the carbon footprint and energy footprint of commuting and travel being so enormous, how can workplace and workplace strategy evolve toward a more environmentally responsible reality? Because 30 years, we're now in the clear and present danger sort of mode.
I know.
It's not hypothetical anymore.
Which is also making employees feel like anxious and depressed at work, in my opinion. Like that's one of these many factors.
Yeah.
So to answer, how can workplace impact that? That's a hard one. I think that's like at a bigger scale. I think for the workplace, if we can look at it, how can we tie, if we look at business goals, if you have specific business goals that are ESG related, right? For the environmental hi, Cindy. Okay. We're in South Florida. The comment. But if we're looking at show the executives why it should matter to you, not just because you should do the right thing, but all right, if you have these environmental goals, how are you meeting them? How could your policies and the things that you're doing positively impact your goals versus, negatively impact them?
Yeah.
So if you have leaders trying to fight it out over whether it's 3 days in the office or 2 or 4, maybe you talk about that. and you can tie it in. I don't think that's going to move the needle, though. What I would say is a bigger conversation, and at least like at Cushman, for example, in our Miami office, we had a meeting last year with everybody, and we had talks about that. And there's people who really care about that. And we looked at like, there's a lot of people moving into Miami. How does talent support that? How does infrastructure? My commute time went to an hour and a half to go from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, and that's 3 hours of my day.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to the Fort Lauderdale office now, which is 25 minutes. But I mean, we have so many canals and infrastructure. Do we have enough schools for the people moving? Like housing, the affordable of housing. So that's where at least, you know, Fran, the background of what is corporate real estate as a whole doing, we all are getting together, at least at Cushman, to say, how does this all impact everything? And when we all talk together as like partners, it helps us to be more informed, to kind of look at those problems and try to figure out how can we advise better? How can we solve for them? You know, I mean, I don't know if that answers it exactly, but that's the best that I could think of, is just how can we find big solutions together, because we're just one part of this big circle.
Yeah. I think this brings up a topic that we have to bring you back and get into. What does it mean to be LEED certified now? Because pre-pandemic, it certainly meant one thing, and now it's like, to use Fran's term, it's quantum now. It's all these different aspects to what makes a building LEED certified and to what level. Interesting stuff, Marissa. I thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I love the art in the background. My wife and I used to own a secondary art gallery, and I'm feeling a lot of Tom Wesselman in that piece of art behind you. So very cool. Yeah. Very, very cool. Okay, let's get to it. And this is the question we ask.
I know we didn't even talk about it. I feel like the people portion is so funny.
Well, you can talk about it in your
yes,
answer.
No, I will.
So let's get to it. What's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a wonderful part of your day, doing many wonderful, meaningful things, and not the all-consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit, Marissa?
Okay, so I thought about it, and as a people person, if you can't tell, one of my like non-negotiables that makes my work really happy is having, it's going to sound cheesy, having good work BFFs, being friends and getting to know people within the company. That it's funny, right before I got on here, I was like, I know I'm going to have fun and this is going to be great, but I was feeling nervous for a second, right? I'm going to be vulnerable. And so I said, all right, hype me up for a minute. And I reached out to 4 of my good work buddies, two that I've never met in real life, which is funny, just to say like, hey, and I would do the same for them. It's having people that if I have a question, I can go to anybody and say, what would you do here? Can you help me? And that feels really good to me. It's also like having a manager that's really supportive, having flexibility. That is one of my key ones, but it's also, I'm going to be honest, it's, do I have healthcare? Do I have insurance? Do I have security to take care of my family? My husband's a fine artist and he paints like this, you can't see, but he was an art professor and now he's a stay-at-home dad. So if I were to lose my job, that would stress me out big time. So making sure that I have the security in my job to do well. And I think the last one I'll add is just the ability to just be yourself. You know, I can talk to a CEO and, I usually do have a more professional background or I'm in the office, but I can also bring this energy and kind of the playfulness once I've established myself, like, hey, we've done all these things. We've succeeded with all these clients. Here's our testimonials. Boom. But also let's have fun, because when we can have some fun and play and like get to know a little bit about everybody, to me, that makes it more interesting. Like if I know my client went to University of Miami and they played basketball and like, bourbon, I want to hear about it. Like, what's the update? Did you try this? And all of a sudden it feels not just like boring work, but I've had like a human connection, and I truly value human connection. So that's why I do art and have a community and have passion projects and am a coach. So I love it all.
Wonderful answer.
My family, I forgot them.
What's that?
I forgot my family and my family, you know, being able to be with my family and like take the time and knowing that that is encouraged by my boss in my company, you know.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, we learned a new term today, hostage negotiator therapist. I love that. I want to see if that becomes
Never got anybody in a workplace like that.
an actual job. Before we depart, Marissa, I'm wondering if you could point our listeners and viewers to where they can find you on social media and maybe learn more about you.
Cool. I love LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, just Marissa Huber, and art website, fun stuff on the side, marissahuber.com, and Instagram. So yeah.
Well, stick around. We're gonna conclude now, but stay in the cocktail room because we'll finish up our conversation there. Thank you so much. I hope we can bring you back at some point this year.
I would love to. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you so much for having me, all of you.
It was a great conversation. Thank you.